Peace, Israel, and Yah bless. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. I would like to title today's segment, The Trojan Horse. Once again, today's segment is entitled The Trojan Horse. Now, many of our people uh, who have been conquered, we've been scattered throughout the earth, we are unaware of the tactics of our enemies. We're not even aware of who our enemies are. But in the book of remembrance, it was made plain to us exactly who our enemies are, exactly what they would do, and for us to be able to identify exactly who we are, first of all, and who our enemies are, we would have to bear witness to this. Now, after we see these things, then we are to go into the text and to verify that what we are seeing is indeed true, that the Most High may validate and verify His word that He is exactly who He is, and that regardless of the generation that we become awakened in, that we will be able to validate these words by looking at the script. Once again, brace yourselves, tighten up your jaws, do not turn to the left or to the right, or you will get hit in the mouth. We're to walk the straight and narrow way of the Most High's commandments. We're not to turn to the left hand or to the right hand. We're not to deviate. We're to walk the straight and narrow way. Now, many of our people in these nations, we were conquered. We were scattered to the four corners of the earth, kicked out of Jerusalem, scattered throughout Africa, brought down into the Caribbean, Central, South, Latin America, North America, and parts of Europe. So we are a scattered people, or we are a fragmented people. We are scattered via our geographical location, and we're very much scattered when it comes to our ideology, belief, and our thinking. So we cannot get on one accord. For the Most High did say that He would place a fire in the midst of us, meaning we will be in trouble, we will be burnt all around us, we will see this trouble. And yet we would not consider to ourselves, why are all of these things befalling me? Why are these evils befalling me? Why are they befalling my children and my grandchildren? And we will be seeing these evils generation after generation. For the Most High said that He would send evil after us. He would send the sword, which is death in all of its manifestations, along with poverty and famine and things of the like. So we would be in these nations confused, first of all, made dumb, deaf and blind, will not be able to understand. There will be no cohesion in the midst of the people. For we are not putting the Most High first. We disregard His laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. In other words, we refused to lead. We are supposed to be the head of all nations. We are supposed to be the family, the head family, that teach the other nations the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. We relinquished that post. We gave it up. We wanted to be like the other nations. We wanted to be as violent as they were, and as corrupt as they were, and as lawless as they were. So therefore, the Most High said, is this what you want? Here you have before you righteousness. I have given you my law, statutes, judgments, and precepts. You have totally disregarded them. You want to join yourself onto other people, and you want to be like other people. Okay, fine. I will withdraw myself from you. I will ship you to the very people that you claim to want to be like, that you love so much. And you will see that they are unrighteous in all of their ways. How will you see this? You will experience this. And upon experiencing the wrath of your enemies, then you're going to want to cry out to me. But when you cry out unto me, I will not hear you. For when I cried out unto you to do that which is right in my sight, you did not hear. So therefore, when you are in the midst of these many nations, and you're being treated unjustly and unrighteously, because these are unrighteous people from the start, these are your enemies from the start. The enemy of a righteous man is an unrighteous man. And the house of Israel were supposed to be a holy people unto the Most High. And when you decide, you know what, I don't want to be holy, then you have in essence made the choice to be unholy. And therefore, birds of a feather flock together. So here we are in the midst of the unholy, in the midst of the unrighteous, being treated in an unrighteous fashion. And most of us have taken a hold of the ways, the customs, the women, and the the gods, plural. They have many idols in these many nations. We have taken a hold of all of these things. Thus our plight. When you conquer a group of people, there's many ways by which to do this. First, you do it physically by means of weaponry, by means of arms, which means some people have to die. But once you have physically subdued them, there has to be something put in place by which to maintain that supremacy or to maintain that loyalty and obedience to whatever laws that you may have in place. So when we were conquered, some of you may be familiar with the story of the city of Troy. The Romans wanted to get into Troy. It's a very protected city, so the way that they entered into it, all forms of warfare, if you're going to deal with war, is going to be cunning, trickery, so to speak. Okay, so you must be deceitful in war and cunning in your approach. So many of us are susceptible to flatteries, to gifts. So the Romans pretty much built a big horse, which is known as a Trojan horse, and had soldiers within the horse and gave it to the city of Troy as a gift, so to speak. And so they lowered their gates to bring in this quote unquote gift. And once the gift entered into the city, then the soldiers jumped out and were able to conquer the city. And what has happened to us is that we have been conquered physically in the many nations of our captivity. However, being conquered physically was not enough. There needed to be an apparatus in place that would control our minds and our hearts, that would make us docile and that would make us non-resistant, and to require our acquiescence when we see the mistreatment of our own people and even of ourselves. So there had to be something put in place by which to make us dormant to the ills that we will see as it pertains to our people. That Trojan horse that's been placed everywhere that we live and in every country that we have been shipped to, sold to, is the church. The church is the Trojan horse of our people. And we have many of these Trojan horses in the midst of us. This is important, for this actually captures the minds of the people that they may adhere to Rome. In the many nations of our captivity, I've stated in previous videos that the house of Israel turned away from the strong one of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is the God of our fathers. And we turned onto these nations. Remember, the Most High stated clearly that he will ship us, he will send us to our enemies. So do understand, in the midst of the lands where you are, you're not in the midst of your friends. You are behind enemy lines. You are in a war zone. And you may refuse to believe that. You may refute the evidence that's before you. But doing these things does not protect you from being killed and being an enemy combatant or an enemy casualty. So in the midst of us, there are these many Trojan horses, which are nothing but stumbling blocks before the house of Israel. So the governing body of the many nations in which we dwell is Christianity. Former Christianity, or the most powerful version of Christianity, is the Roman Catholic Church, which is Roman Catholicism. You can look all through Central, South, and Latin America, and you will find, for the most part, they're all Christian, first of all. Secondly, because Spain and Portugal conquered most of these lands. Spain is in Europe. A lot of people, period, even the Spanish-speaking ones, think that somehow a Spanish-speaking person is some Taino Indian from the Latin Americas or a mestizo from the Latin American areas. We must remember that Spain is a European nation, period. These are white people. So we must remember that. So Spain, as well as Portugal, conquered a vast majority of these lands. And Spain, as well as Portugal, and all of these other European powers, they adhere to Rome. The Roman Catholic Church is the center of all things. And the Roman Catholic Church had a split, which is the Protestant Reformation, And from the Protestant Reformation came all your different denominations of Christianity. They're all one and the same. Like I've said before, at no time does a nation get into a quarrel, a dispute of lands, or in a physical conflict, i.e., with weaponry. They will never contact the Baptist preacher. They will not call T.D. Jakes, Joel Osteen, or any of these other idiots, these idolaters. They will not contact them. When there is a dispute of lands and any type of arguments pertaining to war, etc., they will always seek guidance from the Pope, for he is the head of all of them. All of these European Christian nations, they are all Romans. They are nothing but the fragment of Rome. This is Rome dispersed throughout the earth, rebranded. It is called Christianity. And so, in order for Rome, once we have been conquered by these Romans who are nothing but Christians, who are nothing but Catholics, their government is Christianity or also Catholicism. It's one and the same. Once we have been conquered physically, there needed to be something in the midst of us to ensure that we adhere to whatever law and standard they have set. And that Trojan horse that's been placed in the midst of us is the church. What is the church? First of all, it is nothing but a gift. And we know that a gift will certainly blind the eyes of the righteous. That's what gifts will do. It will cause you to pervert judgment. So, as in any form of combat, there are leaders from small to great, from platoon level, company level, to battalion level. And there are many leaders in the midst of them, all the way up to the general. Your pastor is the general inside the church. So when you see a church, just think of it as nothing but a battalion of warriors in the midst of it for a particular nation. And the priest is, or the priest, the bishop, the cardinal, or whomever you may want to call them, or the pastor, they are the head of that warrior class. However, these warriors carry no weaponry. They do not carry your physical arms. What they carry are the psychological barriers. They capture the people's minds. To fight a conventional war, i.e., with weapons, is very expensive. So after you have conquered the people that you seek to subject, then now there has to be a means of indoctrination of the mind by which to keep them subdued, that you do not have to physically fight them all the time. And that Trojan horse placed in the midst of us is the church. And you have its generals, the pastor, and then you have its sergeants and its commanders, etc., lower on down. You have your deacons and your reverends and whatnot in the church. These are all different leadership roles within that army of enemies of ours. For our enemies cannot walk up in the midst of us, for they do not look like us. They would have to have men who are clearly in allegiance and in alliance with them, that will work against their own people for benefits such as money, position, and power. And this is what the pastor has done. He has sold out to where he is in allegiance with his enemies, which is the power of Rome, call it the Christian church or the Catholic church. And what he will do, he will steer and guide the people. And so when you walk by or you drive by your local churches and you look at our people coming in, going in, or coming out of them, and you are walking after Torah, what you're looking at the Trojan horse that's sitting in the midst of us. And this is how you know exactly who is in cahoots with our enemies and who will adhere to our enemies' teachings and will totally disregard the law, statutes, judgments, and precepts that the Most High has given us. The pastor and the preacher and the cardinal and the bishop, they report directly to the government. Remember, Christianity and Catholicism is a government. It's one and the same. These governments have murdered, enslaved, lied to, and brutalized our people all over the earth. I've said it again. You find any of these former slave nations, and you will find it to be a Christian nation. And when we decide to call ourselves the same name as the people who have murdered and enslaved us and raped us and continue to do it to our face today, then you know that you have lost your entire mind. So once again, look at these Trojan horses in the midst of us. You go on any block where we live, you can find 3 or 4 of them. It has to be in place. This is a mechanism by which to control this people. It is a stumbling block. The Most High said, any man of the house of Israel that comes before him to inquire of him, and he has that stumbling block in his heart, i.e., for example, he thinks that JC died for him, and he thinks that that church, that Trojan horse, is somehow God's house. The Most High said he would not be inquired of by that man at all. He won't answer him. He has nothing for him, for he's worshiping after idols, going into a building, an edifice, an eminent high place that the Most High has never instructed us to build in the lands of our captivity. The Most High had 2 houses built unto him. The first one was built by Solomon. The second one was built by Zerubbabel. They were both built on the same exact spot, though not at the same time. And the third house will be built on the same exact spot as the previous 2. So these Trojan horses are nothing but a place to where you can have the people gather and you can captivate their minds by which they are docile and they will not resist the evil that's being done to them day by day. That is why in the church, they're always presenting hope to our people. You cannot sell hope to anyone but the hopeless. And we have been in a state of hopelessness for the longest time. The church has failed us. It will always fail us. It is a Trojan horse. It is an eminent high place. Our God does not have a house in any of the Americas. So what you go to and you call a church and you're praying and doing all of these things and these pastors that you love so much, this man is not a Levite. This man does not wear the priestly garments. This man cannot petition on the behalf of you. The house of Levi, the sons of Aaron, they are the go-between between us and the Most High. That man you call a pastor cannot petition for you on any wise. He's unable to do this. We are to reach out from the many lands of our captivity via the calves of our lips, and we are to face that one place, that one city where the Most High chose to lay his name. And we must get upon our knees, lift our hands in prayer, bow our heads, and we must make our supplication towards where that city is and towards where those houses were built. And that is a plain indication to you that what you call a church ain't it. Because if you were to face the houses of these idols in here, in these many nations where we dwell, we have so many of these churches, you would be praying, spinning around in circles, because they are everywhere. But our strict commandment was for us from the nations of our captivity that we were to face that city where the house was built, which is Jerusalem. And we are to cry out unto him from the many nations in which we have been scattered. We were to face that city, to face that house, and lift our hands in prayer. So we know good and well these churches that you have all in the Americas and everywhere else, these are not the houses of the Most High. In fact, that's why many of us are going to find ourselves killed in these houses, for the simple fact that there's no protection there. That is not the house of the Most High. You're in there worshiping idols. And when you decide to walk in idolatry, you have no protection, period. So we are to be aware of these Trojan horses when we see the enemies of our people going in and out of these places. These are the pawns that the Christians have used. Our enemies have used. Our enemies are Christians. Let's make it plain. That our enemies have used against us. So therefore you have a man looking just like you, telling you he's a Christian. All he has just said is that he is in cahoots with his enemies, He is against the laws of Yah, and he's against you. Now, I just came across an article where Jamie Foxx said that he never thought that he would see a day where he would live in a Christian nation that would allow the killing of children. See, this is the words of an idiot. These are words of an idiot. Your comedians, your singers, your basketball players, etc. When you read that, it makes it plain that the house of Israel, the men are the leaders of any nation. When a man would come out and make a statement as silly as that, it is a true testament that the Most High words are indeed true, that we have been made deaf and blind, equal dumb in these nations. Jamie Foxx is an Israelite, a quote-unquote black man in the midst of these nations. I am certain his father has told him about the killing and the murders of our people he has seen, and his grandfathers. If his grandfathers and his father didn't tell him about it, I'm certain that his grandmother and his mother told him about all the injustices that they have seen in their time. Now here he is, and he is seeing the same injustices against his own people in his time. And you can search and source the history books and the archives to see where these Christians have murdered and slaughtered our children, have sold them, have killed them, have raped them. And all of these nations that did this were Christian nations. Yet this idiot can actually come before people and state that he never thought that he could live in a Christian nation where they're killing children. They're killing our children every day, abusing them every day in the schools, have a pipeline from schools to jails to lock them up. They're running all types of medical experiments on our children, hitting them with all types of shots. Many of our sons are suffering from autism because of the many different inoculations that they give them. Many of us are ostracized in schools. Our school districts do not have the proper money and the proper facilities and the proper teachers by which our children can excel. And this man that looks like you has the gall to come before you and state that he can't believe that he would see a day where he would live in a Christian nation that will allow the murdering of kids. They've been murdering your people forever, brother. Where have you been? You get my point. And these are our men that's saying this. But many of our men that speak this type of idiocy are normally laid up with a white woman someplace, laying down with their enemies, have sided with their enemies, and walking around in this combat zone, unwilling to fight, unwilling to speak out about the injustices they see against their people. They're playing stupid. That is all. So these are the many things that we have to deal with. We have enemies within, and the enemies that's within us, we can find them sitting in these Trojan horses. That's where they sit, because our enemies cannot come in the midst of us because they don't look like us. So therefore, some of us had to be co-opted. And all of those who have been co-opted, you can find them in the Christian church. Why? Because they will teach them and indoctrinate them how not to give any form of resistance. So what is the Christian? The Christian is nothing but an enemy soldier that doesn't carry arms. You see, our enemies move two ways. They move with weapons and they move without weapons, but they're dangerous either way. So the ones that move with weapons, they actually have them sitting in what we would call a military base in many different lands. Another military base that they have is for their soldiers that carry no weapons. And that base is called a church. No weapons to physically harm you, but they have the weapon of idolatry and indoctrination to mentally and psychologically damage you. And we're going to have to understand that when we're dealing with combat and we are in a combat zone, there are many different types of warfare. And with this warfare, you're going to have spies, and you're going to have sellouts, and you're going to have enemies within. and we are to be mindful of the Trojan horse and those who dwell within them. Peace, Israel, and Yah bless. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. We are going to return back unto the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. We are going to be separated from our enemies. The Most High will sift the house of Israel. He will separate them from the many nations by which he has scattered them, or scattered us within. So we know clearly, if in the latter days that all of the nations will go up to Jerusalem and ask to be taught the Most High's law, and the Most High's law endureth forever, then we know clearly that if someone is telling you that there is no law, we know clearly that is false. You are clinging towards your enemies. The Most High stated that he will separate you. He will sift you out from the midst of them. So you know clinging on to their ways, their customs, their laws, and their idols will not be allowed in the end. So get ahead of the game. Remove yourself from these Trojan horses. Do not count yourself and do not allow yourself to be counted as an enemy towards yourself, an enemy towards your own people, and worse yet, an enemy unto the Most High. Because once you have stated that you are a Christian or anything else, then what you have done is stated that you do not stick to Torah. You don't regard, you totally disregard the law, statutes, judgments, and precepts of the Most High. And to do so is to bring about your own demise. We're to turn back to Torah. That is the only way. That is the only one accord that we can move together in unison. And that togetherness will be the house of Israel together, as well as the nations with the house of Israel together. We will never move forward any other way. How do we know this? We can look at past history, and we can look at what we see today currently. There's no cohesion in the midst of the people. They are splintered. We are not all the same people. We have never all been the same people. We can clearly look at each other and know good and well that we're very different. So the house of Israel, we need to wake up. We need to return back onto Torah. We need to identify those who are enemies unto the Most High. That's anyone that's walking in unrighteousness. And when you look at these Trojan horses, you have to ask yourself, how come we have so many of these Trojan horses in the midst of us, and yet there is no unity, yet we are divided, yet there's violence in the midst of us. We're facing violence from our enemies, and we can get no rest in the nations of our captivity. Why? Because we have enemies in the midst of us who will take gifts from their enemies and become enemy unto us and enemy unto themselves. And they're sitting hiding out in these Trojan horses. And these are nothing but stumbling blocks onto us. Peace to the house of Israel, and peace to the stranger that is of a contrite spirit, that will take a hold of the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, and do them. Beware of the Trojan horse. Peace, and Yah bless.